We look at the 7/7 in minor, it's time to take a quick review on how we notate seven chords and what we call them. Remember, a lot of theory is really a language course. I wish it was more concept, but it's language. So let's take a look. Now, in the olden golden days, if you had a chord like this, all you wanted to do is tell a keyboard player what the intervals were over the bass note. So this is a 7/5/3 chord. 7/5/3. It's a third above the bass, a fifth above the bass, and a 7. So when you're root position 7 chord, it's 7/5/3. But in figured bass notation, you would never say 7/5/3 because if you did that for every chord, you'd have so many numbers that pianists could never, or harpsichordists or organists could never play it. So what they do is they leave off the obvious stuff. 5/3 is obvious. They just put a 7. And that 7 doesn't care if it's a major seventh or a minor seventh. That just means it's in the key. If I were to change the key and put a flat here, then I would have to put a flat 7. So we change it with flats and sharps. But basically, it's just a 7. Tells you it's a root position chord with a 7th added. Now, if I go to first inversion, so I take the C and put it up there. That's what we call it inversion. The bass note's now the second note of the chord, but it's the base of the chord. It's just not the root. Now we have a 3, a 5, and a 6. So 6/5/3. Again, the 3 is taken for granted. So we call that a 6/5 chord. We understand there's a 3. Again, these guys used to improvise these chords. If you put too many numbers, they just got confused. They only needed the information. So a 7 chord, go to inversion, it's a 6/5. The next inversion becomes a 4/3 chord. It's once you see 4/3, they expect a 6 up there. These guys understood. So 4/3 is what you write for second inversion. And the third inversion, final, is 4/2. Again, the sixth is left out. So you can see the interval is 6/4/2. But we wrote notate 4/2, 4/3, 6/5, and a 7. Now that's how classical musicians do it. If there's no accidentals, it means just you're in the key. We don't care. But that's not how popular musicians write it. And there's so many systems. If you go on Finale, and if you ever look at chords, there's 2 systems for Nashville. There's a system for, I think, Scandinavia. There's an American system. There's just so many systems. But most of the time we do something like this. C is your chord. So I say C, and then you notice it says major 7th. I have to say major 7th because if I just write that, they assume it's a dominant 7th chord. They assume it's a minor 7th, a flat 7th over a major. If this is a minor chord, we write the word minor here, M-I-N for minor. Or sometimes you put this in small letters. Now for an inversion, you just tell what the bass note is. So it's still a C major 7th chord, but over E. E is now the bass. C major 7th over G is the second inversion. And I don't even have to put the 7th here. I put a C chord over a B. I don't even need the 7th because the B is the 7th. So you look at how different the notation is. This one assumes you're in a key. It just tells you what inversion you're in, what the bass note is. This one says we don't know what key, so we're going to tell you what the chord is. C major over this. We could be modulating. We could be doing some funky chromatic. It doesn't matter, but we'll tell you what the bass note is. We'll tell you what kind of 7th it is. We'll tell you if it's a major or minor chord. So this is different notation. Again, we can write C minor, M-I-N, if it's a minor thing. If we leave out the M there, it means it's a minor 7th instead of a major 7th. So this is our notation of 7th chords. Now, while we're talking notation, let's talk about how you can tell whether the 7th is major or minor. Because this is a problem for me. When I look at a 7th, it's a big gap. I don't want to count half steps. So let me show you something. I'm going to first write a couple things up here. So that's a third, and I invert it. There's a 4th, and I invert it. There's I'll just do a 7th now, and I'll invert it. So you notice that a third becomes a 6th. And I can tell it's a 6th because it's a line to a space, so it's got to be an even number. Line to a line is going to be an odd number. So 3 becomes a 6. 4 becomes a 5. 7 becomes a 2. They all add up to 9. So anytime you invert an interval, you sum them up, they're going to equal 9. That's interesting. But let me show you something else that's interesting. A 4th is a perfect interval, and it becomes a perfect interval. So perfect intervals just become perfect intervals. But the other intervals do something sort of magical. The major 3rd becomes a minor 6th. Take my word for it, that's a minor 6th. And same thing here. The major 7th becomes a minor 2nd. So anytime you flip a major or minor, it switches from major to minor, and it adds up to 9. So let's look at a couple 7ths, all right? And let's see how easy it is to figure out what they are. I look at this here, D to C. I don't know what kind of seventh that is, but let's invert it. Well, I know C to D. There's a sharp in there. C, C sharp, D. There's a black key on the piano. I know that's a major second. Since I inverted and got a second, I know this is a seventh because that adds up to 9. If that was major, this has to be minor. So that's a minor seventh. This is going to be very useful because the dominant seventh chord is a minor seventh. Other chords have major sevenths, and some chords are even diminished. Let me show you this. Let's take this one, a B to an A flat. It looks like a seventh, and it is a seventh. Let's invert it, A flat to B natural. Now when you invert it, look at this. A flat to B flat is a whole step because there's an A natural in between. A flat, A natural, B flat. That would be a major second. But remember the rule, a perfect interval, if you shrink it, becomes diminished. A perfect interval, if you make it bigger, becomes augmented. A minor interval, if you make it bigger, becomes major. But make it bigger a second time, it's augmented. Major interval, you make it smaller, it's minor. A second time, it's diminished. So we have these terms. Now this one here, A flat to B flat would be a major second. I make it even bigger to B natural. So this is an augmented second. Therefore, this is a diminished seventh. That's going to be important when we come to our next lesson, which is the 7/7 chord in minor.